Hey guys, today we're going to be revisiting the Sota Toys Now Playing Presents Series 2 Jeepers Creepers Creeper figure. I first reviewed this figure back in November 13th of 2011, so about 6 years old. The figure itself is really good, but unfortunately I have to kind of hold him because he is pre-posed and he's really designed for his display stand. We're going to reach to the side and grab our tape measure. See if holding him I can get some actual measurements going for you. The figure itself stands, if you count the fact that his head is slightly tipped down, he stands roughly about 6.5 inches tall. If you put him onto the display stand, however, the figure, if you count the display stand and the tip of the crow's wing, stands roughly about 7.5 inches tall. Yeah, unfortunately with this particular figure, because his feet are pre-posed, you can see that the one toe is bent, or the series of toes are bent on the shoe, and how the other one is in stance. You really can't stand him. He'll topple right over. So this is a very crucial part of the displaying of the figure, unless you can come across with a display stand, but the pegs are extremely large on this display stand. So, you might have to accommodate something else if you, say, perhaps lose this base. Let's look at the base first, then we'll look at the figure, then we'll look at all the accessories. The base has a slight roadside look to it. You can see part of the driving pavement there. And it's got some shrubbery, a little green. I'm surprised actually these have stood up the test of time. I've actually had this in a bag, put away with all my other figures that I really just don't display much of anymore. So these are a little bit more of it's a thicker plastic, but still it feels like it could be a little fragile or bend in any sort of way, and luckily these have not warped. Coloring is very minimal on the little green areas, and then of course the top here, it's kind of like a very muddy olive green with just the strangest looking texture going on there and there. It just looks like a whole bunch of almost looks like the surface of a sponge. You can see the little pegs there. Has a barbed wire fence, slightly bent, and a perched atop of one of the posts here, the wooden posts, is a crow, or I guess it is a crow. I'm not too keen on the color choice of using this weird blue on the under area of the wing. It's actually carried on both sides. Down at the tail, or the bottom part of the feathers, it's just, again, this slopped blue paint. It doesn't make any sense to me. They should have just left it as is. I guess they were trying to get something where, light hitting the feathers of a crow does kind of get you that little reflection, that little bit of tint of blue going. I don't think it's as successful here in plastic form as a real crow, but nonetheless, sculpting on the crow is actually pretty good, despite the fact I just don't like the blue that they made use of. A crow's beak is, again, like that black color, so they could have easily just forfeited putting any additional paint in, but the sculpt actually is pretty good. And then you've got your posts. Your little sections here of the barbed wire are a more pliable plastic, like a little rubbery plastic, so there's a little bit more wiggle, a little more give going for there. There's the underside of the base. Not much really to be seen there. It does actually say 2005. Just again to give you a time frame as to how old this particular figure was. Even though I reviewed it back in 2011, the figure itself is actually relatively old. Alright, so let's pick up the Creeper. I did actually want to re-review this guy because Jeepers Creepers 3, I think, is currently or has already finished shooting. Creeper is one of those real unique characters. He was kind of at a time where I think Hollywood or horror fans needed a new monster because, Freddy and Jason were around for a period of time, but I think it was time to bring in kind of a new monster, and I think Creeper fit that bill. Nowadays, with so many direct-to-DVD releases, there's tons of monster and mass killers and stuff like that, but I think Creeper came at a good time where there could have been a good potential for a new franchise monster. The only downside, though, is the rules that they have attacked on for Jeepers Creepers, where every so often he only can kill for a certain period of time. I think it's like every 23 years he can kill for 23 days, and then you don't see Creeper again. So Jeepers Creepers 1 and Jeepers Creepers 2 were kind of really paired together. Jeepers Creepers 3, I think, takes place in the future. So, I mean, obviously it makes sense because the actors and stuff are a little bit older. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with the Creeper. Jeepers Creepers 2, in which I think this figure is actually based from Jeepers Creepers 2, was a pretty decent enough sequel. The only downside, though, is it put the Creeper, I think, in an awkward ending. Of course, I won't spoil it for anybody, but I would just think, like, why couldn't... I feel like I'm just going to have to spoil it. If you have not seen Jeepers Creepers 1 and Jeepers... You know what? I'm not going to say it. I'm just going to leave it out. Let's talk about the figure and figure alone. Sculpting on the figure is really actually pretty cool. He has one of the creepiest, no pun intended, eyes on one of the movie monsters. This section here, of course, would have opened up and fanned out. He was kind of like a... I want to say almost like a gargoyle, like a demon gargoyle. He had a really interesting look to him, especially when the back end of these little side look, fingertips almost thing fanned out. It was almost like the acid spewing dinosaur from Jurassic Park. Now, unfortunately, again, he's pre-posed, so while you do have the option to rotate his head, the arms do hinge out. They at least give you that. You have a rotation there in the forearm and in the hand and in the waist. Basically, everything from the waist down is staction. You can't do anything with it. You can't bend it. You can't rotate it. You can rotate the feet, sure. But other than that, you can't really do much of anything, really, at all to the lower portion of Creeper. I had entertained the idea, and I have yet to actually do this, but I've entertained the idea of actually trying to take the lower legs off and trying to find a figure that gives roughly about the same sort of look to it. Of course, I couldn't probably get the shredded leg unless I just did that myself. But if I took like a lower, well, maybe like a Jason Voorhees, for example, figure, an Ultimate Jason, and if I took the torso off and tried to put on a straight-legged, articulated Jason, I don't know if that would work, but this figure really cries. NECA or somebody would have to get on board this and give us a brand new Creeper. Like, this is acceptable for, you know, early 2000 figures, but for how good the top portion of it is, it so gets robbed by the fact that the lower portion is pre-sculpted and you can't do anything with it. It's got some great coloring there, all basically the same style of coloring, a lot of grays, a lot of blacks, a lot of browns, but they've done a really good job actually here of sculpting like the shredded articles of his clothing, the hair, of course, at the back. Like, again, it's a great looking figure. Just, it's disappointing that the lower half of it, well, you're so limited. Now, the Creeper can have either this particular look, or, which you can also do too, like he appears in a lot of the beginning of the movie, he does also have his hat, like an old style rimmed hat, and it offsets the coloring by bringing in some extra lighter brown, whereas the rest of the coloring of the figure gets a much darker, gloomier sort of color scheme. And you can display him like this, or what you can also do too, which is neat, you take the hat off, you can take his head off, and you can replace it with the head from Jeepers Creepers 2, which takes a little bit of finagling to get actually onto the ball joint. Get it onto the ball joint, and you get this pretty cool looking head. And you're saying to yourself, what is this giant rod sticking through the side of his eye, or side of his head and right into his eye? What then you can do is take the rod and you can pull it right off, just like you did in the movie. You're treated to some substantially bright pink flesh on the interior of the Creeper. And again, the very worn, ripped away portion of now Creeper's face. It actually does look like it is the exact same face sculpt. Of course, this one now just has the ripped away eye. It's a cool looking effect. I have to admit that the coloring is a little too bright for me. It looks a little bit more like a watermelon pink, But the end result, though, looks really neat on this particular figure. So there's that option, too, if you want to display it. As a side note, though, he doesn't actually have hair on the interchangeable head. So just pop that back off. After all that, pop this off, and we'll replace it back to the original head. Eventually, I do want to get back into displaying this particular figure, and actually some of the figures that I had in my tote collection. I say tote collection because unfortunately so many of these have resided in my totes for the many years that I have not been looking at them. Some of the other accessories that Creeper does come with is a very cool looking battle axe, bladed axe there, where one side is almost like a pitchfork. You've got a spike on the top and a very long, very large, menacing axe blade. It's got some wear to it. They've put in little streaks of gray and stuff just to make it look like it's been used frequently. And you can display it into his hand. It does sit loose. It doesn't sit the tightest of ways. You can either have it farther down, or you can have it kind of more to the edge, like so. What you can also do too is replace the hand out, like that, and put in the replacement hand, which actually does look very similar in design, other than the fact, there we go, that the hand is a little bit more closed shut. This is the more open hand. This is the now new closed hand. And then he comes with a couple of other accessories, such as the handmade articles of weapons that he's made use of, where it has pieces of flesh, pieces of bone, and stuff like that he's crafted into his own weapons. So you've got like a little throwing dagger, which looks very nice. I like how it's got that little jaw kind of holding the blade. I think that's a neat touch. I like that they all look forged. That's one thing I liked in the movie too, that he had all these weapons that he had forged. And then again, you've got teeth. There's a tooth right there. Again, he's just kind of melted this down, forged it himself. So the little throwing shuriken's got bone. Again, like fillings from teeth. Just everything he can melt down into like a throwing weapon. So with this particular hand, you can either have him with the throwing disc, like a little throwing shuriken, or you can also have him holding the dagger. That's, again, entirely up to you. Get his hand, there we go, posed properly. So there's a couple of different options you can go with. Personally speaking, I'm kind of in more favoring of the axe myself for displaying him, but that's just entirely me. All in all, a great looking figure. By the way, also too, I've noticed displaying this guy, I might have mentioned this in the original video, I'm mentioning it now though. The figure stands impossibly onto the display stand. This foot pegs in perfectly fine, but this foot here, I even struggle now getting the foot to line up. It between the shape of the larger peg, between the placement of the foot, it's not the easiest, I might add, to peg it into place, but getting the one foot into place seems to stand the figure still perfectly fine, so you can do that as well. A great looking figure. Sota Toys did a bunch of interesting looking pieces. The Creeper, I think, is by far one of my personal favorites. Modding this guy into a more posable Creeper, I think, is much needed. NECA, I don't know if NECA would ever entertain doing a Creeper. Jeepers Creepers 3 now kind of on the horizon. Maybe we might eventually get a new Creeper. I think the chances are very slim to none, though. So if you guys are interested in picking this one up, you'll probably will have to find this in aftermarket, because again, the figure is so much an older figure. Nonetheless, though, today we were revisiting the Sota Toys Now Playing Presents. This was actually Series 2, Jeepers Creepers 2, the Creeper. Good looking figure from basically this point on. Unfortunately, plagued by the fact that he is, much like most figures in the early 2000s, plagued with pre-posed, pre-sculpted legs. If you guys like this video, certainly hit it with a like. Let me know down below if you've had a chance to watch any of the Jeepers Creepers movies. You see, I was good. I didn't spoil anything. So if you didn't get a chance to watch either of those movies, shame on you, by the way. Jeepers Creepers 2 is a great movie. Jeepers Creepers 1, I would say, arguably a better movie than the second one. But still, Creeper is I feel like an underrated monster. And if you get a chance, you want a fun kind of movie to check out, I think watch those two movies. And eventually we'll get Jeepers Creepers 3 coming out. Can't wait for that. If you guys haven't also had a chance to subscribe to this channel, what are you waiting for? Hit that little subscribe button down below. If you also like revisits and throwbacks, I've got also a playlist there that you can go back and check out some of the videos I've re-reviewed, such as this guy right here. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you next time.